and also design master students from the year 1. And this session relates to the work on broadened participation, and in continuation to that, also broadened recruitment within the university, as well as to themes that we are working with in this course that the Design Master Year 1 students are working with right now. I chose to call it What We Do, because I feel like Open Window is in a way about outreach and how to communicate what it is we do within the institutions, but also for ourselves to formulate what it is that we do and how do we communicate that to people outside of the academic, art-based design education that we are within. Today we're going to do a workshop, but first I will present a series of projects, and I will give a short background to the term of broadened or widened participation, where it comes from and why we are working with it. And the case study, which I called it, is basically maybe more of a work study. I will present a series of projects that I see as linked. I'm not part of all the projects, but some of them I am working with and have been working with before. But they are linked to this theme. So for the live stream part of this day, will basically be maybe me showing and talking, and also sort of a discussion after I've finished presenting. And then for the workshop part, I think it's going to be difficult to join in via the live stream, but we will still have some form of video transmission from the workshop, I think. And also, if you would like to try it out at home, my contact information is in the event, and you can email me and I will send out the instructions and material. So just reach out if you would like to try out this workshop that we will be doing here today. This is my only slide that goes with the background part of it. Broadened participation connected to openness and outreach is something that we're working with in this course in relation to who are we working with, which networks are we connected to, who do we communicate with and how and why. But it is also something that is within the vision of HDK-Valand, and as well as in the vision of Gothenburg University as a whole. We are supposed to work with broadened participation and broadened recruitment as well. And going through all these like policy documents on the institution level of HDK-Valand, but also on the faculty level of our faculty, and as well as the university level, there are basically like 3 reasons why we should be doing this kind of work. The first one is democracy. We are looking at education as something that should be available for everyone. And all sorts of education should be available for everyone. And within the higher education, we can see that there is a problem, especially in Gothenburg, and especially maybe at our faculty. We have a student group that is pretty homogeneous. We have pretty similar backgrounds and interests and take on what design is and can be. So that says something about who gets to study at an artistic design education. This relates to the next one, which is quality of the education and quality of what kind of knowledge is being produced within the university. On sort of a state level, the Council for Higher Education and University has performed like a series of studies all showing that quality of education is improved if we have a more diverse student body, when we have a wider range of experiences and perspectives. We get a more complex understanding of what it is that we do and how it relates to society around us. And the last one is sustainability. Maybe especially in a design education where we are actually sort of part of forming the future. in a material level, but also on a system level. We are really making decisions on how things should be shaped and who can use them. And if it's just based on our own experiences within this group that is not that diverse, maybe, how can we be sure that we are making decisions that will in the end lead to a future that is available for everybody and can be used by everybody? So as I see it, like the open window or the open week and the sort of outreach when the university is showing what we are doing and really trying to communicate that to a larger audience is the outreach part. And up until now, I feel like this has been the way to also work with broadened recruitment. If we show what we are doing to a larger and larger group of people, maybe more people will be interested in joining us. And maybe then we will get a more diverse student body. But just by seeing something doesn't mean that you understand it or can engage with it or feel like you are welcome in that situation. So it's like an inbuilt problem there. We can't just show, we also need to communicate and share our knowledge in a way that is actually working. Now I will begin this case study, as I call it. I have tried to find projects that, for me, forms this line from when I started working with participation in design and co-design as a method, to see where I really started looking at how to communicate between different groups. I'm a child culture designer, so I'm working with kids, but also looking at different backgrounds. And this is the first project where I started working with my local community in Biskopsgården. On a really small level, but it still has something that triggered work after this. So in 2015, I did a project called Spider City. And it was a way for me to explore and investigate how we could really work on an equal level in a design project. Me as a designer who had education, but also children who did not have the same perspectives as me. What would happen if I did not start the projects or initiate work? What would happen if I just followed a group of children and let them initiate work and I joined? So it was basically a series of shorter tests. This one, Spider City, is started out with a kid seeing well, the child was just going to use the bathroom, but there was a spider in the bathtub, and it was extremely fascinating that somebody who was living in a bathtub where we would like take a bath or take a shower. So it started with this playful sort of construction of a narrative around this city of spiders that is parallel and invisible in our homes. Another sort of quick test was there was this group of kids who were super into Wall-E, the movie about this robot in the future who is living in this apocalyptic version of Earth. It's just a big trash pile and nobody lives there anymore. And they were really into this concept of the apocalypse and things being destroyed and a future where we cannot live. So we started looking at what kind of protection could we work with if we will see a future that will be apocalyptic in some way. So by starting to imagine what that apocalypse could be about, they started also formulating how to protect our bodies and still be able to be in this world. So on this one is, in this world, there is always acid rain, so maybe you would need an umbrella hat. And in this world, there's no pure water anymore. So maybe you would need a copying machine where you could collect the last pure drop of water and copy that forever using this machine to always have water, as well as Coke and Zingo and ice cream. This was a two-step test where we also ended up building these suits, like mock-up suits. Another test was another group of kids were really into trying to recreate the sense of being in the ocean on land. And in the end, it was just a piece of plastic hanging on this swing. But they were really into it, and they were working on it for like 2 days straight. And the last thing in this project, which really triggered a line of work that I continued with, was I started doing study visits to the Raska Design Museum here in Gothenburg with groups of children from Sjumilaskolan in Biskopsgården. And I didn't really tell them why we were there, except that we were doing like a visit to this museum. And I didn't tell them what design is, and I didn't really show them in a certain way. We just walked through the whole museum and looked at everything. And afterwards, I asked them to tell me what design was based on what they had seen. And they could also draw. And one child drew this chair. And for that kid, design as experienced from that time's Raska collection was just a chair, and it's a brown one. And it wasn't, she didn't love brown chairs. It was not a super exciting thing for her. But that was her take from that museum visit. And that kind of made me think, because for me, design is so much more, and it could also be this other set of more playful things or projects. So I really started thinking about how can we communicate design, and how do we do it within the museum in a way that speaks for itself, without an adult telling a kid what is good or bad or what amazing things design can do. In a way, this first sort of tryout, the Spider City project, if I would position it, I can say that it's sort of initial investigation. We tried using play as process. Children were part of initiating work. I didn't control it. We had a really flat hierarchy. I was more like a playmate for them than an adult being in charge of what to do. And in a way, it was basically tryouts. It was really exploring this way of working, which is maybe not the easiest way to work. As a designer, it can be really hard to not know what the end result will be and who it will be interesting for outside of that situation. In 2017, I had finished my master's education at HDK-Valand. I did the master's program in child culture design, and I was asked as an alumni to be part of co-curating the children and youth program of that year's open week, which is the same week as we are in now. And I was asked to look at it from this broadened participation view, and in a way I was also asked to be part of it since I had connections in Biskopsgården and I had started working with children there. And in Biskopsgården there is not like a big cultural house that we have in maybe Angered or Frölunda. We have a library, and we have some youth centers where you can try out making music and stuff. But we don't really have a certain, like a specific arena for culture to take place in that area of the city. So the university were really interested in maybe reaching that group that I started working with in a wider way. And we ended up, me and Nathan Clydesdale and Emma Överberg, also alumni from the CCD, ended up making this whole program of events, which all took place in the aula at Sjumilaskolan in Biskopsgården. So we moved the whole program for children and youth to this part of the city, using the schools there as a platform. And we wanted to be really allowing and inviting, and we wanted the kids in this school to feel like, okay, we are using their spaces and they are invited to participate, but we also wanted them to feel like they were part of creating this platform. So one of the first workshops we had was with a group of kids from the Fritis, the after-school activities at the school, who came in and made us this huge banner of the Open Week Gothenburg Design Festival that we then hung above the big stage in the aula as a framing for the whole festival. And then within the program, we tried activating the program in different ways, but the idea was that all things happening within this program in this space would be inviting to try out design for yourself, so try out the project. So this here is an example of a student project, which were about sweatshops and female textile workers within application design. And this student were really into looking at the amount of time it takes to make a small application within fashion industry and what it is worth in the end, how much we pay for it. And it ended up being a workshop where kids were invited to also try making these really detailed applications, also to understand the amount of time it takes. So there was a series of different student projects that were activated in this way by trying out the process in the group of visitors, making the visitors participants or co-designers for a short moment. And then we also had Design Lab S were invited to host a workshop. Design Lab S is a design studio from Skärholmen in Stockholm. And their sort of artistic leader in this studio is Samir Alfelt, who is standing there in the center with the cap on. And he started exploring with the kids what kind of factories Biskopsgården would need. And in the end, they started making these machines for printmaking and making their own T-shirts, which they were doing like over the whole week, I think, at least more than one day. And it just ended up being this massive collection of T-shirts with different ways of using machines to make prints. And that went on for a week. And if I would try to position that work in retrospect, we tried really using participation both in the way the activities were formed, but also in the framing of the festival. So we were inviting the kids to also be part of making the graphic profile for the program and decorating the space. We also worked with communicating or sharing understanding of design work by being in the design process, really working with design as a way to understand design. I would also sort of position this Open Week as what Open Week tried to do was share and communicate what we are doing within our school, and that they did, or we did. But what went back to HDK? We were there for a week, and we let these kids try out all this stuff, and then we left, and we didn't come back. And what does that mean? And how can we really talk about participation if it's a one-way communication in that sense, that we are not really gathering feedback from these participants? We are not really interested in what did they think of this, or how did they understand this, or how do we follow up? And we didn't have the time for it at the time, and it wasn't in the plan. This was maybe like a first trying to really do this sort of broad work off-site, outside of HDK, in this part of the city. But it lacks something there. We could have also used this opportunity to really understand what it is that we are doing from their perspective, and how we can be open for other perspectives in when we are shaping our education. After this, which was in 2017, I went on working with other things. I applied for funding to continue working with design and design pedagogy in Biskopsgården, but I didn't get the money. So I needed to start working with other paid jobs, and I was working for a few years with city planning as a design pedagogue all over the city and also outside of Gothenburg. Working pretty similar by doing creative things together in order to understand design process or in order to understand city planning. But I sort of left Biskopsgården. But something happened after that design festival. Raska museet and Design Lab S and Sjumilaskolan continued to collaborate. I was not part of it at all. It just happened. And I started following their work, and it was really interesting, because in a way I felt like maybe I was part of starting this up. And they did a series of projects, but one of them was Expertrådet, where Design Lab S worked as sort of the project leader, I would say almost, together with a group of kids from Sjömilaskolan, as well as a group of senior citizens from Göteborg. And the aim of that work was, how do we gather new perspectives on design? How do we allow other people to investigate what design is and the norms that are around design? Who decides what is design? Who decides what is good design? Who is a designer? And how does that affect what kind of designs we are seeing around us? So it was kind of like looking at design in a critical sense with this group of people called the Expertrådet, the experts. One thing they did was building this, it's kind of hard to see on this projector screen, but they built this machine, like an expert machine, which was sort of a tool for investigating if a design was a good design, if it was a bad design, how does it work. And it also it went into the work of Raska with how to work with exhibitions. So this project ended up in an exhibition as well, where this expert council or this group were part of presenting an exhibition and also presenting their work and choosing design objects to be presented. These images I have borrowed from the Raska Museum webpage, I can also say, so that it's not mine. And if we would try to position that work, or if I would try to position that work, not even being part of it, but just following it from a distance, I can see that the museum started it out by asking for input on how they are working. They wanted another view of their practice, which is pretty different from we want to show what we are doing. We also want to know what they think. The project was about investigating values and norms within design, and not about making design or being a designer. It was really like looking at the power hierarchies within the design field. And it was also about understanding design work by doing design work, but at the same time having this layer of critical view or analyze. And these new perspectives were taken care of. They were brought back into the museum's work and altered how they were working. And now, this year, Raska Museet, they felt, after this work with Design Lab S ended, they felt like, how do we avoid what we did here to just be dropped? Like I mentioned before, like how do we make sure that we continue the work and not just make these like, here we are and now we're gone? How do we stay with the groups of people that we are engaging in our work? How do we take care of it in a long-term perspective? So Raska Museet applied for funding from Kulturrådet to make this a longer project, and got the funding for at least 3 years as it looks now, but the goal is maybe to actually have a space in Biskopsgården that could be sort of a satellite of Raska. I am part of this project again now as a project leader for it, working for Raska in Biskopsgården. And we will work with Ryaskolan, which is a different school also in Biskopsgården, and Bostadsbolaget, which is the housing company that takes care of that whole area, Norra Biskopsgården. And together we will be something called Designklubben. And we are still working on what exactly it will be and how we will work during these 3 years. I'm not starting this job until November. And that's when we will really start making decisions on how to work. But in a way, if I would try to position this project from this starting point, where we haven't really done anything yet, I would say it is something special about how this project works with Raska, Ryaskolan, Bostadsbolaget, to benefit all of them. Bostadsbolaget has this entry point, which is they are starting to work more and more with social aspects of their housing area. They started making these meeting spaces. They started this fixotek where you can come and borrow tools. They started to really try to build a community. And they were really eager to work together with Raska Museet to also bring in design into that work. Ryaskolan is a school that is pretty similar to Skymilaskolan. They are also struggling with some of the difficulties in these outer parts of Gothenburg, where people maybe don't have the language with them from home, maybe they don't have study culture from home, maybe they don't have like academic educated parents. Maybe they are really lost in what their position will be in Sweden. Maybe they are not even born in Sweden, some of the kids going to this school. And often it's like this void where you're like, okay, I'm going to school because I have to, but maybe I'm not even getting grades high enough to continue to higher education or gymnasiet. So it's this sense of what are we supposed to do with this? It's like a loss of input. There's not much going on. There's like sports events and the school, but other than that, it's a pretty quiet area. And Ryaskolan saw this as an opportunity to activate these kids in doing sort of creative work, and also in using design as a way to actually alter things around them, as a way to almost feel empowered by being allowed to make decisions regarding changing something in the school environment or changing something in this area of the city. So they can see it as a positive tool for empowering this drive in the kids. And Raska, they are still really interested in making a museum that is for everybody in the city and being relevant, and making sure that the way they portray design is relevant to the visitors and not just for a smaller group of the city. So for them, it's really about also gathering input and perspectives on what they are doing in order to alter the way they work with their exhibitions. It's also a really good example of when social practice and design kind of goes hand in hand. We are acting locally where people live with the people living in this area, and we are doing it together, but it will also influence other parts of society from the local space. It is still about sharing or communicating what it is a designer does, or like what we do, by doing together. And it has this long-term perspective. So Raska they already started sort of opening up for actually hiring teens who have been part of this project as summer jobs, or like giving out summer jobs but to teens from Biskopsgården, and also try to really see how they can fit into a system that could lead to higher education, or to maybe even becoming a designer exhibiting in Raska someday. Which makes it a really interesting project in a lot of ways, because you have this, it's not just sort of a broadcast situation where a designer shows up and informs other people about what we are doing, and it's not a situation where I would show up and talk about my work and then nothing else happens, but it's really aiming to be this loop, or like a circle. And that's sort of where we are at now. In November, we will start doing this work. Bostadsbolaget are bringing in space and also funding for materials and access to sort of workshops where you could actually build stuff. Ryaskolan are just super open. They have 560 students, or like pupils, in their house, that they're just like, you can meet all of them. So it's really about finding out how we can work in the best way here. And Raska is also super excited. They just got this funding, and we can do, all of a sudden they can really be in the space for a longer time and really take care of the work done there. So that is sort of where we are at. And this will also in a way connect to the workshop we will do after a short break. But first of all, it would be really interesting to hear sort of if you have questions or feedback or things that you are seeing in this project.
I'm very happy to see, like, this is maybe unfortunately the first time I see some type of self-reflection or criticism to this type of social intervention in other areas than the art school, and also really deeply look into how is this exchange actually working, for who are you doing this. After being in some years in the science education, I often have this, like, I don't know, a little bit bitter aftertaste for after this type of project, when it was you just did something and then you were a good student.
Mm.
You did good social work because you were there.
Mm.
So that's a relief to see that there's some kind of discussion like this.
Yeah, and it feels like that's sort of, it has to go that way. We can see that this way of working or these thoughts are sort of developing over time. And there was a period of time where these sort of outer areas of the city were really tired of these projects. They they even had this word, projekttrötthet, like project fatigue, because there were so many people that wanted to be really good people and help out and show what we are doing and do stuff with kids in these areas that don't have the opportunity to. And it was often this perspective of we can help them, or we can give something to them that they are lacking. And I think that's also nice, but eventually you will reach a point where you also need to know what you're trying to get back, to make it like a communication and not just this, I'm helping you, to really make it collaborative in that sense.
I have another question.
Mm?
How
Ja.
how important do you think it is? I think I asked you once before, but that you are from Biskopsgården, or that you are local connection there. I also know that Samir, he's from Skärholmen, right?
Well, he started his studio there at least.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if
He
he's
has-
from that area originally, but he started
Yeah.
working there and being in that
Yeah.
area.
How important do you think that is?
I think in some ways, like looking at the Open Week, the design festival we had at Sjömillaskolan, I'm pretty sure that that would not have happened if it wasn't initiated by somebody, like the question to the school came from somebody who knew about the area and who knew about the school. And also in those startup conversations with the principal of that school, you could tell that there was also this stress of even letting other people look at what they are doing within that school. Because especially Sjömillaskolan has been such a focus for critique for a long time. Like, people are really staring at this school and criticizing everything that they are doing. So for them it was really hard to actually let people in, because they were so used to being criticized when doing that. And it was this fragile position for them. And I think in the end that we would probably not have been allowed to do that work there if it wasn't because the teachers and the principal knew that I were from the area, and I already knew how the school was working. And I was not shocked when I entered the building, because I had been there before. So I think in that sense it is an easier way to find common ground, and like this, just understanding a space or like a location in the same way makes for an easier collaboration, I think, especially when starting up work and really also understanding what the work means in that space. To do that, you kind of need to have the knowledge about the space. So for me, it has worked like that. And for me, it has been like an in to actually working there, but also the motivation to why I want to work there. Because I've been living in this area for a long time, and it's kind of a problem in these areas of the city that when people start educating themselves and getting better and better jobs, often you kind of move away from these areas. Especially maybe like this white flight perspective, that Biskopsgården used to be a pretty white area. And the second people started climbing in the careers or educating themselves higher, they moved to the inner city because it's nicer. So for me, it was really about also being critical about my own position. Because when I moved there, I was a cleaning lady at Liseberg, working just part-time, and I was a single mom. And I started educating myself and doing more and more like advanced work or like getting better and better paid jobs while I was still a resident. And for me, it was really important also to not let that knowledge out of the area, but to keep it. And that's sort of my political view and my drive. But I think it makes it easier to really tap into local communities if you have the knowledge. And if you don't have it, I think you really need to be aware of that when you start working with groups of people or parts of the city that has this sort of critical eye from the rest of the city, to be really like self-reflective and humble when entering those areas and not feeling like you can help them, because that's such a it really makes the other participants feel small in a way, or it could be leading to that.
You said you worked as a city planner. So when doing that, did you feel like there was actually an ambition from like the city of Gothenburg to make areas like this more diverse in some way, like work with housing in some way? Did you experience that, or?
I was working as a design pedagogue with the city planning office, so I was not doing city planning directly. But over the past few years, it's been more and more important in city planning processes, not just here, but globally as well, to look at the children's perspective. Like, how do we make sure when planning something that we are also seeing it from the child's point of view, or like younger citizens' point of view, to make the city work for everybody and not just focused on adults with work and how they are moving around in the city and what they need from the city. So this sort of perspective of bringing in children's experiences in sort of planning for the future of the city has been sort of growing this interest. And right now we have this new law saying that children's experiences and opinions and knowledges and perspectives should be part of every sort of larger decision-making process, especially when it comes to building or planning for cities. So it's this thing that has sort of, at the same time as I did this education, and it kind of says something about the Child Culture Design Master's program when it started working. It was kind of parallel to these ideas emerging in society as a whole that we really need to take into consideration. And I would say, probably like the same sort of development of that work as I showed in my example has been going on also, that maybe starting out it was trying out different ways of working, and maybe it was a lot about building something with kids and putting that as an image in a report, and we worked with kids, to going more and more into how do we really understand what they are telling us, how do we analyze the work that they are doing, how do we communicate the work that we want them to do. If we ask a kid, how would you like a playground to be? They might very well start describing what playgrounds look like. So how do we get around those sort of potholes or like traps that we could easily get into? So I can really see how also in that area the level of really taking it seriously and really trying to actually do what we are saying we are doing are also being like raised with every project almost. Any other sort of question or thought? Yeah, Marcus. Do you want the microphone?
I'm curious about this, how we target like a broadened audience. it's often happening sort of geographically by identifying an area or a physical location, like a certain school. Have you worked with other methods in identifying that kind of other audience that we're interested in hearing, getting feedback from, or including in our idea about design to make it more relevant and all these things that you said really well? But I'm just interested in about aspect, how we're targeting and how we're finding the broadened audience, if you like. Are there other methods than just identifying a school or some area?
I definitely think so, but also like working with children, I think that was my original to finding this newer audience, or how do we actually present like academic artistic design work to somebody who is, I mean, in kindergarten? Like, how can we do that? Working with age in that sense. And then the Biskopsgården thing also brings in questions of like background, of course, but still I'm only working with children. So it's kind of maybe adding a layer to the child perspective, but also looking at children from a group who are maybe not already within families who have academic education themselves, or maybe even who has the Swedish language with them, and who are maybe like really having a hard time finding work in Sweden. So it's also like a class issue going into that. But my focus has been children, and then it's become children in Biskopsgården because I'm really active in that area. But I think it's a super interesting take to look at how can we make it a method for opening up all over the city, or finding the people in the inner city even who don't have this sort of to our field. But I haven't worked wider than this, really. I think it was kind of fun, the Design Lab S thing, where they also brought in senior citizens to really get the younger citizens and the older citizens working together. I think that could be really a thing of like collaborating, not just with one group as a designer, but maybe having two different groups and seeing how sort of 3 points of experience combined, what that can lead to. So I think that could be one way of looking at it, but yeah, it's a super interesting question.
For me was the positioning really, really interesting and helpful, and I'm wondering how you implemented that in your working process. So I think it's not even positioning afterwards, but how did you use it in your process and also in collaboration with the others?
Yeah, it's also a really good question. I think like looking at intersectionality from a political point of view, self-positioning is this really effective tool in seeing what kind of privileges you have. And that's sort of how I got into positioning as a term, or like a way of working. You can really look at, okay, I'm a woman, but I'm also white, and I'm born in this country, and this is my mother tongue. This will lead to certain things, but then it's also a way to see what kind of experiences I don't have, and how these things are privileges compared to people who don't have the same that might have other privileges, but this sort of intersectioning web of power relations. And when I started working with participatory design methods, I wasn't really thinking in this way. Like these first projects that I showed, that's an after construction. I like looked back, and it was part of reflecting upon the work and what it meant. But by doing that over the years, it's also all of a sudden I can do that in the beginning of a project and really use that as a method in a way that I didn't before. So this is, it's just like been maybe the last year that I started projects out by looking at the different parties and being really active in analyzing how they go together and how the system of the project is working on this sort of meta level, or different level than what is actually happening in the project. But I think it's like a super effective tool to really understand what it is that we are doing when we are doing design work, especially together with other people or other groups or other like companies, to really make this mapping in the beginning. I think can be a really effective way of seeing those dynamics or relationships. thank you for super interesting questions. Any last question before we do like a mini break and prep for the workshop part of the day? Nope. Okay, so for if anybody's following this via the live stream, as I mentioned in the beginning, the workshop part will probably be really hard to understand just by looking at what we are doing, and maybe we won't even be able to film what we will be doing. But if you are interested in trying out that or seeing what it was about, I have put together a PDF of the material instructions, and I can email it to you. So this workshop isn't really, it doesn't have to happen right now. It could be done tomorrow in a different group of people. So just contact me if anybody outside of this room would like to have access to that information. Okay. Thank you. Thank you.